my channel? Welcome back to another video. I'm Jessie E. This is Ravenclaw, and you're watching. I've never done a reading diary before, and it seems so fitting that The Hate U Give would be my first because I have avoided this book like the plague ever since it came out. I unfortunately have personal experience with police violence, and I knew once this book was released that I wasn't able to handle the subject matter. This book has so much power and impact, and Angie Thomas has released On the Come Up, which I'm also going to be doing a reading diary on. And I felt like it was time for me to finally stop running from this book. And honestly, what truly inspired me to do this reading diary was that I got about 50 pages into this book, and I had already written so many notes, sticky tabs, and annotations, more than I have ever done with any other book thus far. In this video, you're gonna hear me talk in a very uncensored manner, and if that is something that bothers you, you should definitely click off now, because I'm not going to censor myself or water down my experiences in order to make anybody else feel better. Let's jump right in. I'm gonna give you my thoughts on where I'm at in the book thus far, and then I will update you when I get another 50 or 100 pages. Despite the heavy subject matter, I am absolutely grinning while reading this book because it is so clear that Angie Thomas wrote this book with Black kids in mind. When I was growing up, there were no YA contemporaries that weren't clearly written for a white audience or with a white audience in mind. I think it's so beautiful that Black kids are finally able to pick up a young adult contemporary and see their language, their culture, their perspectives and identity laced through the novel. There's a scene on page 20 I want to talk about. So the kids are at a party and a gunshot goes off and everybody goes running. And Star gets separated from her friend and promptly texts her friend Kenya to make sure that Kenya's okay. And Kenya texts back, "I'm fine, but when I see that girl, I'm gonna beat her ass." Which is a reference to this girl that she was like about to get into a fight with before people started shooting. And Star says, "Is this chick for real? We just ran for our lives and she's ready to fight?" It is not a coincidence that Angie Thomas included this scene in the novel. When you grow up in the hood, you are never allowed to take a moment to grieve. Because if you grieve, if you let those floodgates in, what's behind it will drown you. And Kenya is absolutely representing that. Kenya represents what it's like to be a Black kid surrounded by danger and never be able to process it. Then after Star's friend Khalil gets killed, there's a scene where she's sitting in the ambulance and she's just like, why aren't they covering his body with a sheet? Why aren't they giving his dead body the level of privacy that it deserves? And then she quickly moves on to thinking, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And I feel like that is an exact reference to Eric Garner, who was the heavyweight Black man who was strangled to death by police in New York City. As people were filming this, he was saying as he was lying on the ground, slowly dying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And the last scene I want to talk about before I get back to reading is when Star is sitting at home kind of reflecting on when she invited her white friends over to her home. And she says, Haley didn't want to come. Her dad didn't want her spending the night in the ghetto. I overheard my parents say that. Maya came but ended up asking her parents to come get her. There was a drive-by around the corner and the gunshot scared her. That's when I realized that I have to keep my world separate, meaning the friendship she has with her Black friends and the friendship she has with her white friends. That scene stuck out heavily to me because it reminded me of all the times that my white friends didn't want to come to my house growing up, which I never understood because I didn't live in a bad neighborhood. I just didn't live in a rich one. One time, my friends and I were headed to the beach and we were in this big van and a bunch of us forgot to bring towels. So we had to make a stop at each one of our houses. My white friends were just like oohing and awing over each other's houses. Every time that we pulled up at a house, they would say something like, oh my God, your house is so cute. I love your bushes, etc., etc. And I thought that this was strange because I've never done that. Like I've never complimented someone on their home. So at the time, you know, I'm about 13 years old, I thought it was really weird, but I didn't say anything. I was like, okay, whatever. My house was the last stop when we get to my house and the car is just dead silent. And by my standards, I thought my house was pretty decent. You know, it was a 2-story, it was well maintained. Definitely wasn't the most beautiful thing ever, but there was nothing wrong with it. There was this strange amount of tension in the car that I just did not understand. Went to the house, got my towel, came out, and it was completely undeniable, the looks of pity that was in my friends' faces. And I hated it. I hated that they were looking at me as if there was something wrong with the fact that I didn't live in a 4-story house. And none of those girls ever came to my house when I asked them to after that. Once they saw it, they wanted nothing to do with it or me. It also reminded me of this time when I was 12 years old and I went to stay at a friend's house and she came back laughing and told me that her mother had just said to hide all of the nice silverware because I was there. So it's interesting because growing up, I was fed this idea that I wasn't good enough because my house wasn't nice, because I didn't live in the nice white part of town. And none of my friends wanted to come over to my house because it didn't meet their standards or their parents' standards. But on the flip side, whenever I would be invited to one of their houses, their parents would watch me like a hawk because I didn't belong there. And while they would never outright say, hey, we don't want this black kid in the house, it was so clear with the way that they looked at me and treated me. And there are so many black kids who grow up with these microaggressions. And we wonder then why black kids feel isolated. We wonder why they don't feel safe joining clubs or engaging with others at school, why they sit off to the side in the cafeteria. It's because we receive these little messages from everybody that we're not good enough, and we never will be. All this being said, Star doesn't fit the image of what her friends think a black girl should be, and she's definitely treated like an outsider from her black friends as well. They kind of make fun of her for going to that white school and for the way that she dresses. I relate to that so much because even though the kids at school were receiving messages that I was some sort of criminal, they still were disappointed whenever I proved that I was just a quiet, shy, nerdy kid. And they seemed almost disappointed when I never spoke in slang or got into fights or stole things. Teased me as a result of it, but it definitely wasn't just white kids, it was black kids too. You know, would call me an Oreo because I wasn't fitting the stereotype of a black person. And yet whenever I went to their house, they treated me as if I was a stereotypical black person. Okay, that was a lot, so I'm gonna keep reading this book and I will check in with you in a little bit. An update on The Hate U Give. Star's father went to prison when she was 6 years old and has been out for quite some time, and he's changed his life around. I really appreciate that he's opening up to Star about his prison experience. Because in young adult fiction and young adult contemporary, we never get to see parents who were imprisoned, which unfortunately is a reality for a lot of Black, a lot of Latinx kids. And it can be so frustrating to read about kids who have parents who never went to jail, were never involved in any trouble. Because it makes it difficult to relate to those parents. Like so often growing up, when I would read young adult contemporaries, even when I read young contemporary fiction now, and the parents are just these loving, sweet, perfect, non-traumatized people, it's really difficult to relate to them because that's not how our parents are. You know, like our parents were in the struggle. Our parents were in juvie. Our parents were working 3 jobs since the age of 14. Like, our parents have been through some shit. And it's not to say that, you know, white parents have never gone through anything, but it's been frustrating for me to read about these kids who have these kind of picture-perfect parents because I could never relate to them. So I like that we have representation of a man who was incarcerated and has kind of beat his incarceration and now runs a business and is a figure of light and hope in the community. That's a really beautiful thing, especially because prison has fractured a great many of Black families. There's also a moment where Star talks about how she and the other Black kid at school are expected to date, and I related to that moment so much because growing up in my white school, there was a kid named Andre, and one of my best friends, her name was Audrey. Audrey one day came up to me, like walked up to me in the hallway, and she was like, you and Andre should date. And I had barely ever said more than 20 words to this boy, so I automatically knew that she was suggesting this because we were both Black. Usually I just kind of rolled my eyes whenever my friends made these kinds of comments, but that day I just wasn't feeling it. So I was like, why? Because we're both Black? And she looked at me and she was like, yeah, you both match. And I will never forget like the smirk on her face when she turned and walked away. And I never understood why kids would sort of go almost out of their way to make these kinds of comments towards me. Comments that they knew that somewhere in their heart they knew weren't okay, but they still seemed so compelled to say them anyway. And I don't know if it was like to see if I would react, to see if I would become the angry Black girl that they were always waiting for me to be. To this day, I still don't know what the point of them was. But Star experiences little comments like that throughout the book, and I just relate to them so heavily. And the book is really heavily unpacking the topic of gang violence and drug violence in Black communities, drug use and drug selling, and the cycle of how Black kids get involved in selling drugs and how drug use, you know, kind of effectively enslaves certain Black communities. And I was not expecting that dialogue in this book. So Star's boyfriend is a white kid, and I love the conversation around their interracial relationship. It's become very clear that her father would not approve of her dating a white boy, and I love that Angie Thomas included how prejudiced Black people get when Black people decide to date outside of the race, especially Black women. We have this assumption that whenever a Black girl dates somebody who's not Black, it's because she hates herself and she's not proud of where she comes from. And then we have this idea that somebody who's dating a Black woman is only dating her for a fetish, right? We have this idea that if a white boy is with a black girl, it's not because he likes her or that he's just attracted to her because she's beautiful. It's because he must have a fetish for black girls. Not because he just so happened to meet her and fall for her, you know. It's simply because he has a thing for her skin tone, and that's all the value that she holds for him. That is so damaging to black women and so insulting to tell black women that the only time somebody who's not black will look at you is if they're objectifying you for your skin color. And if you are black, no matter what color your partner is, no partner can ever erase your experiences, and no partner will ever magically make you not black. No matter what kind of person I'm with, I'm always still gonna be black. I'm gonna be black when I go to work. I'm gonna be black when I get pulled over. My blackness doesn't just magically disappear because I'm dating somebody who isn't black. We've been fighting to be seen as nuanced and creative and smart and intelligent and empathic and loving, and yet the second that we have a black kid who is nerdy or doesn't talk like the rest of the black kids, we find a black kid that's too out of the box. We have to crush him or her or them. It comes from this idea that we already have enough violence and trouble being black as it is, and you don't want to add to that by being weird. The image of what black is expanding and changing and opening up, and some of us don't want that to happen. Some of us are scared to see what our identity would look like if it wasn't shaped entirely by ancestral trauma, by current threats. I don't know if this will make sense to my viewers who are watching who aren't black. If it does, let me know. I'm kind of just word vomiting here because this book is giving me all of the feels, and I can't believe I waited so long to read it. Actually, I can. So I'm about halfway through, and hopefully I will check in with you at the end. And to conclude all of that, if you are one of those people who likes to shame others for dating outside of their race, I'm gonna need you to get a hobby. Bake a cake, do yoga, learn to spin, do what you need to do, but fix yourself. And if you can't fix yourself, keep your mouth closed. Shh. Okay, one more update. I seriously don't care what color you are. Date the person who makes you happy. Date the person who makes you feel seen and loved and beautiful. Date the person who listens to you and respects you and is willing to grow with you. Date that motherfucker. I cannot say how grateful I am that Angie Thomas also included a lot of love and joy and a lot of coming of age in this book outside of the very critical topics. We get to see how deeply in love Star's parents are. We get to see the dynamics between Star and her siblings. There's this amazing scene where she goes to prom and just has the time of her life. So badly needed a scene of a young black girl who's been through everything, just letting go and having fun. Star's uncle Carlos is a police officer. It represents the struggle that a lot of people of color go through when they want to become cops. This idea that they want to become a police officer to change, essentially do better and to uplift and show that police officers don't have to be a symbol for fear, and their belief that policing can be something different, something more. So on the happiness trail, I have to talk about Chris, who is Star's boyfriend. I've been holding my breath thinking, like, just waiting for him to say something shitty or just not to be in Star's corner, but he is so heavily riding for her, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful that she has this boy who wants to protect her and loves her and listens and believes her, despite the fact that so many adults and other kids at her school don't believe her and don't give a shit about what she's going through. It's so beautiful that her boyfriend has come through and that they are pulling through this situation as a couple. And I'm buddy reading this book with Justin from Ghost Reader, and he's kind of brought up that the book also talks about the struggle of not knowing whether you should leave your neighborhood, give up, and save yourself and kind of move somewhere safe where you can thrive and raise your family in peace, or if you should stay in the neighborhood and try to change things. So far, this book is perfectly executed, and I will update you as soon as I finish it. So I'm almost done with The Hate You Give, and I have to say that I was not... What the fuck? Hey y'all, so I have completed The Hate You Give, and this book is getting 5 out of 5 stars from me. There was so much I appreciated about this novel. I loved how every single character was pivotal to the story. There really were no minor or side characters, and it was incredibly well done on Angie Thomas's part to create characters that felt whole and important in and of themselves, who weren't just there to further Star's story forward. Even antagonist characters like Haley were so critical and important to the story. I hope that watching this video has kind of helped helped you see things about the book that you might have missed, or maybe to even have affirmed conversations that you were having with yourself about the book. I'm really, really excited to do a review of On the Come Up. I'm about halfway through this book, and I'm currently filming a book diary on this as well, and I will be comparing The Hate U Give to On the Come Up to let you guys know kind of my thoughts on both of these books and how this book measures up to The Hate U Give. But honestly, this book was about so much more than the relationship between police and Black people. It was about everything that has to do with Blackness, and it was all incredibly well executed. And the reason that this video is so long is because I wanted to go really in depth into this book and dissect it as much as possible, because from what I've heard about the community say about this book, it's pretty much about the topic of like police violence. And I don't want the other really important issues that the book addresses to be kind of overshadowed by that topic, because there's so many important themes in this book that are worth discussing too. So thank you for kind of sticking around. I know this was a really long video and I talked a lot about my own experiences and my history growing up. So I hope that you guys know me a little bit better, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for my book diary of On the Come Up, and I will see you in my next one.